Snow swept across the valley in pale sheets, each gust carrying a sting that burned against bare skin and froze the breath of anyone reckless enough to be caught outside. The wilderness of the high frontier was not a place for the faint of heart. It swallowed the weak and tested the strong, until even the hardiest men doubted the worth of their own survival. Against that endless white, the silence was complete, the kind of silence that made a man hear his own heartbeat louder than the wind. But tonight, that silence shattered. A cry, piercing, raw, and full of terror, ripped through the storm. "They are whipping my mama." The voice was shrill, young, and desperate, cutting through the howl of the gale like a knife. For a moment, the valley seemed to hold its breath. Then came the echo, sharp cracks of leather snapping against flesh, followed by muffled sobs and guttural laughter. The sound did not belong to the wilderness. It belonged to men who carried cruelty in their fists and found pleasure in the pain of others. Out from the tree line stumbled a small figure, her feet bare against the crusted snow. She couldn't have been more than 9, her thin frame wrapped in a torn shift that did little to guard her from cold. Her hair, black as raven feathers, was tangled and plastered to her face with ice. She stumbled, fell, pushed herself up again, and kept running, clutching a wooden charm against her chest with both hands. Each breath escaped her lips in panicked clouds. Tears streaked her cheeks, freezing almost instantly, but she didn't stop. Her mother's screams drove her forward, her small legs trembling with every step. Behind her, back in the clearing where lantern light flickered against a snowbank, 3 men circled a woman. She was young still, though life had already carved hardship into the lines of her face. Heavily pregnant, her belly round beneath the thin folds of her dress, she struggled to remain upright against the relentless strikes of the whip. Each lashed tore fabric, raised welts, and drew blood, yet she bit back cries, muffling them with clenched teeth. When her knees buckled, she wrapped her arms around her stomach, as if her own body was nothing but a shield for the child inside her. The men laughed, a coarse and bitter sound, their breath fogging in the night. One spat into the snow, tightening his grip on the handle of the whip. "Teach her what happens when her kind thinks they can talk back," he sneered. The girl's scream had carried farther than anyone expected. Across the frozen timberland, deeper in the forest where no man dared wander alone, a figure stayed, tall, broad, and silent as the trees themselves. He moved with a slow inevitability, each step crunching through the snow as though the ground itself bent to his will. Wrapped in a wolf pelt coat, a wide hat pulled low over his brow, the man was a legend whispered in saloons and around campfires. Some called him the ghost of the past, a loner who walked with wolves and left no trail but blood. Others swore he was nothing but a tale told to frighten children into obedience. Yet here he was, flesh and bone, drawn by the sound of a child's desperation. The girl, stumbling now, nearly collapsed at the edge of the trees. She blinked through the snow, her vision clouded, until she saw him, a mountain of a man, shoulders like boulders, eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. He said nothing. He did not reach for her, but she knew instinctively, whether by instinct or sheer desperation, that he was her only hope. She clutched his leg, the charm pressed tight to her fist. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking with exhaustion. "They are killing her. Please help." For a long moment, he stood motionless. His breath rose in steady plumes, his silence unnerving. Then, without a word, he moved. Back in the clearing, the whip cracked again. The woman staggered, knees sinking into the snow, her strength bleeding out with each lash. The men were too caught up in their cruelty to notice the shift in the night air, the sudden presence behind them that carried weight heavier than any storm. When the next lash fell, it never landed. A hand, broad and scarred, closed around the leather mid-snap. The whip jerked taut, its handle ripped from a man's grip as if a child had been playing at soldiering. The attacker spun, his face twisting into shock as his eyes rose to meet the figure looming above him. The giant's grip tightened, the leather groaning, before he cast the whip aside like trash. The clearing fell silent except for the woman's ragged breathing and the distant howl of the wind. "Who the hell?" one of the men began, but his words faltered. Legends had a way of hollowing out courage. The ghost of the past was not supposed to be real. The giant said nothing. His silence was more terrifying than any threat could have been. His gaze shifted briefly to the woman, blooded, trembling, still clutching a belly, then back to the men. One reached for his revolver, hand shaking more from fear than cold. Steel flashed. A knife, long and brutal, appeared in the stranger's hand with the ease of breath. The firelight glinted against the blade, and the man with the revolver froze. The air was thick with tension, the kind that made every heartbeat sound like thunder in the chest. The girl stood at the tree line, eyes wide, clutching her charm as though her life depended on it. She had never seen anyone like him before, never seen such a wall of flesh and muscle move with the calm certainty of a storm. To her, he wasn't just a man. He was deliverance carved into human form. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Fear gnawed at their bravado. One spat nervously, muttering, "Ain't your fight, stranger. Walk away." Still, no answer. The silence stretched, suffocating. Snow swirled, hissing against the fire as it melted into steam. The stranger's eyes never left theirs, pale and unyielding. Then, slow as an avalanche, he stepped forward. The leader, desperate to reclaim control, lunged. His fist swung, clumsy and reckless, but the mountain man caught it mid-arc, his other hand slamming against the man's chest. The settler flew backward into the snowbank with a grunt, the impact shaking loose a spray of powder. The second man cursed, fumbling for the revolver he'd been too afraid to draw earlier. This time, he managed. The gun came up, finger twitching against the trigger. But the stranger moved faster than a body his size had any right to. He slammed his shoulder into the gunman, twisting his wrist until the revolver clattered to the ground. The knife pressed cold against the man's throat. The third man froze where he stood, eyes darting between his companions. His courage broke. He bolted into the trees, crashing through the underbrush, his shouts fading into the distance. The giant let the second man drop into the snow, clutching his throat but too terrified to move. The leader crawled back to his feet, face pale, blood streaking his mouth. "You're dead," he spat, though the words wavered. "You don't know who we are. You don't know who we ride with." The mountain man finally spoke, his voice a low growl, as if dragged from the earth itself. "Leave." It was not a request. The two remaining men didn't hesitate. They scrambled into the night, tripping over their own feet in their haste to escape. Their retreat left only silence and the hiss of the fire. The woman collapsed fully into the snow, her strength finally gone. The girl rushed to her side, sobbing, clutching at her mother's torn sleeves. The giant crouched, his shadow swallowing them both. His hand, rough and calloused, brushed against the woman's arm, not gently, but firmly, grounding her in the present. She raised her head, eyes glazed with pain, and met his gaze. "Why?" she whispered, her words barely audible. The giant had no answer. Perhaps he didn't know himself. Perhaps the scream of a child had stirred something long buried beneath scars and solitude. He stood, looming over them, scanning the tree line where shadows stretched long. Danger was not gone. Men like those didn't forget humiliation. They would return. The girl clung to her mother, but her eyes followed him, searching for any sign of intent in his weathered face. He was not savior, not yet. He was only a man who had intervened when no one else would. But in that moment, in that frozen clearing, he became their only chance at survival. Snow fell harder, thick and unrelenting. The fire sputtered, its glow shrinking. Somewhere beyond the trees, a wolf howled. The giant adjusted the rifle slung across his back, the knife sliding once more into its sheath. He looked down at the woman, then at the child. His jaw clenched. Without a word, he extended a hand. The woman hesitated, pride and fear warring in her eyes. But her strength was gone, her body too battered to resist. Slowly, she reached up, fingers trembling, and placed her hand in his. He pulled her to her feet as though she weighed nothing, steadying her against his chest. The girl followed, clutching her charm tightly. Together, they stepped into the dark timberline, leaving behind the dying fire, the blooded snow, and the echoes of cruelty. Ahead lay only wilderness, merciless and vast. Yet within that wilderness flickered the faintest spark of something neither of them had felt in a long time, hope. And far behind them, in the shadows, eyes watched. The storm had not yet ended. The forest swallowed them whole, branches groaning under the weight of ice, shadows shifting with every flicker of pale moonlight. Snow pressed heavy on the pines, muffling the sound of their passage, yet the girl's soft sob broke through the hush as she clung to her mother's arm. The woman limped, her breath ragged, her swollen belly tightening with each painful step. The giant bore most of her weight, one arm steadying her while the other carried their only torch through the storm. He didn't speak. He never did. The silence that stretched between them was vast, but it was not empty. Every movement carried intent. Every glance meant more than words. The girl stumbled, and he stopped, crouching to her level. His eyes, pale and unyielding, met hers in the glow of the torch. She expected anger for slowing him, but none came. Instead, he reached into the fold of his coat and drew out a strip of dried venison. He placed it in her hands without comment. She sniffled, blinking up at him, then nodded. That was enough. He rose again, guiding them deeper into the wilderness. Hours blurred together. The mother's strength waned, her steps faltering until finally her legs buckled beneath her. She sank into the snow with a low groan, clutching her stomach as if to hold the child within her still. Panic surged in the girl's voice as she tugged at the giant's arm. "She can't walk anymore. Please, help her." He did not hesitate. Stooping low, he gathered the woman into his arms as though she were weightless, her head falling against his chest. Her dark hair spilled over his coat, tangling in the wolf fur. She murmured something in her language, words he did not understand but could feel in their tone. Gratitude mingled with fear. The girl ran alongside, her breath sharp in the cold as she tried to match his long strides. The wilderness stretched endlessly. Frozen rivers cut through the trees like veins of glass, and the howling of wolves followed them at a distance. Once, their glowing eyes caught the torchlight, circling, daring to close in. The giant shifted the woman on his shoulder, freeing his hand long enough to draw his rifle. A single shot cracked through the stillness, echoing across the timberland. The wolves retreated, their eyes vanishing into the dark. He didn't fire again. He hadn't needed to. When at last they reached a hollow sheltered by rock, he lowered the mother to the ground. The cave provided little comfort, but its walls cut the wind, and that was enough. He stacked kindling with practiced motions, striking steel until sparks bit into tinder and flame blossomed. The girl crouched close to the fire, hands trembling as she warmed them. Her mother sat with her back to the rock, every breath shallow, her face pale with strain. The giant watched them from across the fire. His features were carved hard, beard thick with frost, eyes lit by flame and shadow. He seemed more beast than man, yet there was something in the way he kept scanning the girl and her mother, never letting his attention drift along. The girl felt it, the weight of his grief, though she did not know what ghosts haunted him. She clutched her charm tightly, thinking of her father who had once promised to keep them safe before he disappeared into the mines and never returned. Snow hissed at the cave's mouth, the storm raging on. The girl leaned against her mother's side, whispering softly, but her mother drifted in and out of sleep, too weak to respond. When the fire burned low, the giant added another log. He caught the girl watching him, and after a long moment, he nodded, a simple gesture, yet it eased her fear. For the first time since the night began, she felt something other than terror. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm of survival. The storm never relented, and they could not risk staying long in one place, not with the men who had fled surely gathering others to hunt them down. The giant led them ever deeper into the timberland, carrying the mother when she faltered, guiding the girl across frozen streams, setting traps for hare and ptarmigan. He spoke rarely, and when he did, his words were clipped, heavy, as though dragged reluctantly from a place long sealed shut. The girl, unbothered by his silence, began filling it with her own voice. She told him stories her father had whispered at night, legends of dragons, of rivers that sang, of gods who tested mortals with hardship before granting them strength. Sometimes he seemed not to listen, his gaze always sweeping the horizon, but other times he thought she caught the faintest shift in his expression, as if some part of him long buried stirred at her words. Once, as they crossed a ridge where the wind threatened to throw them into the gorge below, the girl nearly slipped. He caught her by the scruff of her coat, hauling her back with ease. She gasped, clutching at him, and in that moment she pressed a wooden charm into his palm. "It's my father's," she whispered. "He's gone, but maybe it will keep you safe." He stared at the small carving, a crude figure, smoothed by years of handling. His jaw tightened. He tried to give it back, but she shook her head. "You need it more." Reluctantly, he closed his fingers around it, tucking it into his coat. He said nothing, Yet for the rest of that day he carried it close, touching it once when he thought she wasn't looking. One night, as they camped in a ravine, another presence entered their path. The girl woke first, startled by the faint crunch of snow. She shook the giant, pointing to the figure standing just beyond the firelight. A man, tall, clad in buckskin, his long hair tied with bone ornaments. A bow rested in his hand, arrow already nocked, eyes fixed on them with suspicion. The giant rose slowly, rifle in hand, but he did not raise it. The two men stayed across the fire, their silence heavy with history. The girl sensed something, an old recognition, the kind that carried both respect and distrust. The warrior spoke first, his voice low and sharp in his native tongue. The giant answered with a single word, one the girl did not know, but it seemed enough to lower the bow slightly. The warrior stepped closer, eyes narrowing as he took in the blooded, pregnant woman and the child huddled against her. His expression softened, though only slightly. He spoke again, gesturing to the dark woods. The giant listened, nodded once. The warrior's gaze flicked toward the girl, then back to the giant, and after another pause, he vanished into the night as silently as he had come. The girl looked up, confused. Who was he? The giant answered after a long silence. An old friend, or enemy, depends on the day. It was the most he had spoken in her presence, and she held on to those words like treasure. The next day, the girl asked no questions, but she felt different knowing that others still roamed these forests, others who watched, judged, and perhaps would stand beside them. She wondered if the giant had been alone all his life, or if he had once known family and lost them. His eyes sometimes gave it away, moments when he stayed into the fire too long, as if seeing faces no one else could. The mother grew weaker with each mile. The strain of carrying life within her while battered and blooded left her fragile as glass. She walked when she could, but more often she rested against the giant's shoulder, whispering thanks she wasn't sure he heard. At night, when the girl thought her mother asleep, she caught her mouthing silent prayers. She prayed not for herself, but for the child yet to be born, for the hope that her daughter would not be left alone. It was during one such night that the girl, unable to sleep, placed her charm back beside the giant as he rested. He lay against the rock, hat tilted low, breath steady in slumber. She set it carefully on his chest, then crept back to her mother's side. In the morning, it was gone, tucked once more inside his coat. He did not mention it, but she noticed the way his hand brushed against it as though drawing strength. The storm eased at last, leaving the forest glades with ice and brittle silence. Yet the quiet was not safety. The girl could feel it, the way the giant moved faster now, scanning every ridge, every shadow. The men who had fled would return, and they would not come alone. The wilderness was vast, but hatred had a way of following. When dusk fell on the fourth day, they reached a frozen meadow. The air hung heavy, too still, as if the land itself waited. The giant halted, raising a hand. The girl froze, her breath caught. The mother leaned weakly against him, too tired to question. From the tree line ahead came the faintest glimmer of steel, the whisper of movement. The giant's rifle rose slowly, his eyes narrowing. Then came the sound he had been waiting for, the distant crack of branches under boot. They were being hunted. The girl's stomach knotted with fear, but she did not cry out this time. She looked to the giant, waiting for his lead. He glanced down at her, then at her mother, his jaw set. For the first time, he spoke more than a word. Stay close. Don't run. Whatever happens, stay behind me. It was both command and promise. And though the storm had ended, the true reckoning had only just begun. The meadow lay hushed beneath a pale dusk, the snow hard as stone underfoot, each blade of frozen grass glittering like shards of glass. The girl clutched her mother's arm, her small body pressed close, eyes wide as she peered through the dim light. The woman could barely stand, her strength fraying with each breath, her swollen belly tight as if the child inside already sensed the danger encircling them. The giant stood before them, rifle in one hand, knife in the other, his frame dark against the fading horizon. Then came the sound again, the crunch of boots, slow and deliberate, spreading through the trees. Shadows shifted. 5, maybe 6 figures emerging from the pines, their rifles slung, their faces grim beneath wide-brimmed hats. The girl recognized one instantly, the man who had fled the clearing. His lip curled when his gaze found them, his voice thick with spite. Told you. Boys, didn't I tell you? The ghost walks, and has got himself a pair of strays. Laughter followed, cruel and jagged, though none of it carried true ease. Fear clung even to their bravado. Legends weren't easy to laugh away when one stood right in front of you, larger than life, silent as stone, with eyes that cut through men like steel. The leader stepped forward, the same brute who had wielded the whip. His face was swollen now, bruised from where the giant had thrown him into the snow. He spat blood into the ice, voice seething with hatred. You made a mistake. Stranger. Should have kept to your woods. You think you can shame me in front of my men and walk away? You think you can put your hands on me and live? The giant's answer was silence. Only the creak of leather as he shifted his weight, the tightening of his grip on the knife. The leader sneered, waving his hand. The circle closed tighter, rifles rising. The girl whimpered, burying her face in her mother's torn dress. The women held her, though her own hands trembled, whispering words of comfort she did not believe. A sharp whistle cut through the tension. From the shadows on the far ridge, another figure appeared, the native warrior. He moved like a ghost, bow drawn, an arrow already notched, his expression unreadable. The men turned, cursing, startled by his sudden arrival. The giant's eyes flicked to him only once, but in that glance an entire conversation passed. Two men who had survived too much to waste words. The leader barked orders, panic lacing his voice. Take them all. The world exploded into violence. Gunfire cracked, sparks leaping in the snow. The giant moved with brutal efficiency, his rifle booming once, dropping a man where he stood. Another lunge with the blade, only to be caught by the throat and hurled aside as though weightless. The warriors' arrows sang, finding their marks with deadly precision, each shaft a whisper of death through the cold air. The girl screamed, clutching her mother as a chaos swirled around them. Snow erupted in sprays where bullets struck, smoke clouding the air, the reek of powder mixing with the iron tang of blood. The giant fought like something forged in violence, knife flashing, fist crushing, every movement heavy with purpose. He was no longer man but avalanche, unstoppable, inevitable. Yet the men pressed harder, their numbers bearing down. The leader bellowed, charging forward with a shotgun. The blast roared, grazing the giant's shoulder, spinning him with a force. Blood stained the snow. The girl cried out, terror searing her voice. But the giant did not fall. With a guttural growl, he closed the distance, the knife tearing the weapon from the leader's grasp, steel meeting flesh in a blur. The two clashed with primal fury, fists and boots crunching into snow, each blow a war drum. The leader fought like a cornered animal, spitting curses, teeth red with blood. The giant's strength dwarfed his, but rage made the man vicious. They stumbled, slammed into the ground, rolled through crimson-streaked frost. The knife clattered away. Now it was bare hands, bone against bone, life balance on the edge of will. The warrior kept the others at bay, arrows flying, but he too was pressed, forced to draw his hatchet, fighting in silence as though death itself guided his arms. Still, the bandits fell one by one, the snow swallowing their cries. The leader clawed at the giant's face, fingers gouging, but the mountain man seized his wrist, twisting until bones snapped. The man howled, writhing, yet still fought on, kicking, biting, slamming his head forward. It was desperation, animalistic, survival fueled by hatred. The giant's fist drove into his ribs, cracking bone, but still the man spat blood in defiance. At last, the leader's hand found a rock, heavy and jagged. He swung it wildly, smashing against the giant's temple. The world spun, blood running into his eye. The leader reared back for another strike, screaming, "You ain't no ghost. You're just a man. And I'll—" The word cut short. The giant's hand closed around his throat, squeezing until the rock fell uselessly to the snow. The leader kicked, clawed, his face turning purple beneath the crushing grip. The girl watched, frozen, her heart thundering. The warrior paused mid-battle, eyes fixed on the scene. This was the moment. The giant's rage surged, his muscles trembling as he held a man's life in his hand. One squeeze, one snap, and it would end. The cruelty, the pursuit, the terror. The leader's eyes bulged, spit and blood dribbling from his lips, yet still he sneered, even in strangled gasps, daring him to finish it. But then the giant saw her, the girl, clutching her charm, eyes wide with pleading. Not for blood, not for vengeance, for mercy, for the man she had begun to believe he could be. His grip faltered. His breath came hard, ragged, like a beast wrestled down from the brink of madness. Slowly, with a growl that was part fury, part sorrow, he hurled the leader aside. The man collapsed, gasping, choking, beaten but alive. The fight drained from him, his body curling in the snow like a worm. Silence fell at last. The last of the bandits lay dead or dying, the survivors scattering into the trees, their courage shattered. The warrior lowered his bow, scanning the field with calm precision. The giant stood tall, blood streaking his face, his chest heaving, his knife reclaimed but no longer needed. The girl broke from her mother's side, rushing to him, throwing her arms around his leg. "You didn't kill him," she whispered, her voice small but certain. "You're not like them." For the first time in years, something shifted behind his eyes. Not quite peace. Not yet. But something close. He touched her head gently, his rough fingers trembling against her hair. Behind them, the mother cried out, doubling over with sudden pain. Her hands clutched her belly, her face contorting. The giant moved instantly, lifting her carefully, carrying her to the ruined shack at the edge of the meadow. The warrior followed, silent, standing guard at the door as the storm rolled back in. Inside, the night became a crucible. The mother labored, her screams muffled in cloth, her strength failing. The girl held her hand, tears streaking her face. The giant, awkward and unsure, did what he could, fetching water, steadying her shoulders, his presence a wall of strength when hairs crumbled. Hours passed, endless, until at last a child was born, its first cries shattering the silence. The mother wept, cradling the infant, her exhaustion etched deep but her eyes shining. The girl laughed through her tears, touching her baby brother's tiny hand. The giant stood back, watching, blood still drying on his skin, eyes shadowed with memories of another child long gone. When dawn came, the cabin was filled with pale light. The mother, weak but alive, whispered, "You saved us, but you cannot stay. They'll come again. You bring danger." Her words were soft, not unkind, but final. She knew the truth. Safety was fleeting, and his presence, as much as it had spared them, would always draw blood. The girl shook her head, clutching his coat. "Don't leave. Please, don't leave us." The giant knelt, meeting her gaze. Slowly, he reached into his coat and drew out the wooden charm. He placed it back into her palm, curling her small fingers around it. "Keep it," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper, "for when you're afraid." Her tears spilled, but she nodded, holding it close to her heart. He rose, shouldered his rifle, and stepped into the cold light. The warrior watched him go, their eyes meeting in silent understanding. No words were spoken. None were needed. The giant walked into the snow, his figure swallowed by the storm, his steps heavy but resolute. He was alone again, as he had always been, but something within him had changed. He carried not just ghosts now, but the faint echo of a child's trust, a reminder that even in a world of cruelty, mercy could still be chosen. The girl stood at the doorway, baby in her arms, watching until the last trace of him vanished into white. Her breath caught, her heart aching, yet she whispered softly, "Thank you." And the wilderness, vast and unyielding, carried her words into the wind,